Hi everyone, this is Erin Stilter, and this is week 4, video 1. And I'm covering chapter 12 in our book, The Myth of the American Superhero. And chapter 12 is called Star Trek Faith as a Fan-Made Religion. And that's on pages 247 through 264. The chapter starts by talking about how religion as we know it is fading in popularity because our culture is more secular and science-based now than it used to be. And worship has kind of switched over from worshiping gods and deities to worshiping technology and pop culture. But the main point of the chapter is to talk about how Star Trek fans, how their feelings about the show and actions have turned Star Trek into a religion. Which is ironic because the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, has been quoted as saying religion is largely nonsense. And he also made the effort in the original series to discredit traditional myths and faith. So the first subsection of the chapter just gives an example of an episode that makes a point to discredit faith. It's the section is called "Kirk is the Serpent in the Garden with the Apple," and the episode is called "The Apple." And the crew lands on an island, on a planet that's a paradise, and the people are primitive. And Kirk plays the part of the serpent in the Genesis story in the Bible, and he brings knowledge of good and evil to the people of this planet, which breaks the non-interference directive, which is really important on the show. So the main point that I took from this section is that Star Trek used mythic elements to unwittingly create a new pop religion capable of, this is a quote, capable of powerfully inspiring the thoughts and actions of fans. Just to tie this section into some of our previous readings, this episode of Star Trek clearly pulls from the Edenic myth that we talked about on pages 22 through 25, and Kirk and his crew would be considered the others invading the paradise. And so, let's see, moving on to section 2, the ecstatic Trekkie phase of spiritual formation. This section mainly talks about a book called Star Trek Lives that was published in 1975 that talks about fan experiences, Star Trek fan experiences, and how the show kind of came to be considered a religion, or the beliefs of the fans really is what came to be considered the religion. And these fans feel like they have experienced revelation and redemption through their experience with the show. This section also makes a lot of comparisons of the show to Christianity. Like it compares Spock to God and Kirk to Christ. And it says they're both superhuman redeemers, kind of tying them into our book talks about superheroes, modern American superheroes. And so they would fall in that category. And the fans of the show would be considered disciples. And they feel like the show spreads hope and love, which obviously Christians feel about our faith. And so the main point I drew from this is that the fans of this show feel like the show is kind of a living thing that's gone through resurrection and rebirth through new shows and new movies and fan fiction. So section 3 is called Star Trek as the Private Redemption of Trekkers. And I learned a new concept here. I knew fans of the show are called Trekkies, but those are more casual fans. And then the more serious fans are called Trekkers. And these are the ones who really were integral in this becoming a religion. And there's a lot of examples in this chapter of fans talking about their experiences of redemption and new life through the show. And it also talks about the concept of goal effect, which is something talked about in Star Trek, and it is the, quote, challenge to a tired mankind to strive once again for goals that seem unreachable at a fatigued moment in American history. That's on page 254. And I would say that kind of compares to, in Christianity, to the Great Commission, as what Star Trek fans take as their directive. And this section also talks about how some Star Trek fans actually see Star Trek as an extension of their Christian faith. So they take some of the themes that they find in the show and apply them to Christianity. And really the overall main theme of this section was the importance of the show to the fans, and how that was key in it becoming more like a religion. And let's see, section 4 is the creation of fan-made religion. The creation of fan-made religion, sorry. This section is primarily talking about how the fan literature is kind of like the theology of the religion, whereas the original series would be considered scripture. And it talks about how science has inspired the Star Trek religion as opposed to kind of causing our regular religion to lose popularity. And then I found this quote, and I thought it kind of summed up the main point of the chapter, or not the chapter, this section. And that was the theological message of Star Trek, according to fan material, relates to world redemption and individual fan redemption. Okay, section 5, the significance of dress up and play. We're all familiar, most of us are familiar with, like, on the Big Bang Theory, all the guys on the show have their Star Trek outfits they wear to Comic-Con. And with these Trekkers, this is pretty common. Fans model their actions, look, and dress after the show's characters. Kind of like how Christians are taught to model our behavior on Christ and his actions. And fans see actors and characters in the show as deities. All right, and then it talks about fan literature. That's kind of the play aspect that the title talks about. And how some fans try to act out their fantasies in real life. That can be anything from stalking the actors of the show to anything as innocent as it talks about an elderly woman who records all the shows and then she dubs her voice over the female characters' voices so that she can watch it and then feel like she's in the show. So the main point of this section is that Star Trek fans take the next step beyond imitative play to integrate Star Trek values in their lives as a kind of secular religion. And, okay, the 6th section is called Star Trek's corporate version of pilgrimage. And it primarily talks about this attraction in Las Vegas called Star Trek The Experience. This attraction is actually closed now. It was still open at the time this book was published, but it closed in 2008. But in the attraction, they had exhibits that the book compares to religious relics and illustrations, and it showed clips from the show and the movies that would be like considered religious art. And then the audience went through a 4D experience where they were attacked by Klingons and have to fight the Klingons. And the book kind of compares this to religious pilgrimages that some people of faith take. But more importantly, I think this subsection also talks about some of the downsides to the Star Trek religion. And those are the violence that's kind of prevalent throughout the show and movies, which kind of contradicts the religion's message that the show is spreading hope and love. And then the capitalism that's present, because they got to make money. But I'd say a lot of people would probably argue that most religions have these downfalls as well. So let's see. And then the last section is called Moving Past Poaching. And this section is actually, we've kind of covered this topic before in some of our past classes. In chapter 1 of the book that we've read in the past called Spreadable Media, it covers some of the concepts from this subsection that talks about kind of the symbiotic relationship between fans and the material that they're fans of. Like, they feel ownership of it, so they go and make like fan fiction. And without the fans, then the material like Star Trek would have no purpose if there weren't fans. In some cases, I guess content owners don't appreciate the fans feeling this ownership and then making other products. But it seems like the Star Trek creators kind of embrace the fans and their fan fiction and fan art and that sort of thing. An author named Michelle DeSerto said fans are meaning makers for the products they consume. Pop culture affects them and influences them. And and it also talks about a book by Henry Jenkins called Textual Poaching. And Henry Jenkins is actually one of the authors of the book Spreadable Media, too. So there's some similarities there. And the main point I drew out from this section is that, this is a quote, people see fans as only consumers rather than contributors, which hinders the study of Star Trek as a pop religion. So overall, just a little recap. The kind of the main point of this chapter is that the fans really are the ones that have made Star Trek, given it the religion status. These kind of super fans, the Trekkers, and how their feelings go to a deeper level. And anyway, thanks for sticking through this with me, and I look forward to watching all of your videos, and I hope everyone has a good evening. Thanks. Bye.